All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I hope you're all well and in good spirits. My name is Suman, and I'm delighted to be your host for this webinar today. We're going to share some insightful use cases, practical examples, and success stories on how brands are leveraging location data to maximize ROI on their marketing and advertising programs. We're going to keep it short. The presentation would be 30 minutes, and we will leave 10 minutes for questions. But please feel free to submit your questions during the session, because our speaker will be taking the questions as they come in as well, if they're relevant to what we're presenting at the time. Before we begin, let me introduce to you or reintroduce to you some of you. You might already know about us, Quadrant. We are a location data and business intelligence company based in Singapore. We are a division of Appen, the world's #1 AI training data company. We collect and provide data for business intelligence, market research, and development of AI and machine learning products. I'm also joined by our GM of Location Data Solutions, Mr. Tim So, to answer any questions on the Quadrant side. But most of all, we're extremely honored to be joined by our friends and clients at OnSpot Data, a leader in geospatial data analytics. They are trusted by prominent brands across the globe for their easy-to-use tools that help generate insights for the average business user who has no knowledge of data science. Some of their specialties are building targeted audiences, performing footfall analysis, analyzing campaign performance, and origin destination analysis. And I'm really excited to introduce our speaker, Mr. Dale Hartzell, co-founder and CEO of OnSpot Data. We're also joined by Alyssa Paschke, who is the head of marketing at OnSpot, and she will be helping us take some questions later in the session. So without further ado, let's get started with what we came here for. Dale, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Welcome, everybody. OnSpot's been around for quite a while in this industry, and we've been able to work with a number of different clients and customers with very unique problems that they're trying to solve out there. The one thing we found in working in this industry is that data is a foundation, and really what drives the implementations are answering specific questions that a customer has or that they're trying to answer. Data by itself doesn't do that, and that's where OnSpot comes in. Our team works very closely with our clients to simplify all the complexities of that data and answer the questions that are critical to their business and bring value to what they're trying to achieve as a business. So today we're going to talk through a number of different cases from different challenges that have been presented to us as a company. So we'll talk about an example in the banking industry, a couple of different examples from the out-of-home advertising industry, and then the more traditional marketing aspects that a large number of our clients use our platforms for. Let's move on to the next slide, and we'll get started with that first example. Quick introduction by way of how we work with Quadrant. One of the things that's critical in the solutions that we're delivering to our customers is that everything we do is based upon real data. We don't do a lot of modeling or projections or anything like that. So we're actually looking for high quality location data that we can use that has enough volume to provide a meaningful answer to a customer's questions. And that's how we work with Quadrant to ensure that what our platform delivers is actually relevant and providing the appropriate level of information that our customers need. We see a lot of competitors out there that do marketing off very small samples of data, and at OnSpot we don't feel like that actually provides the type of answers that our customers are looking for. So we're really working with the data that Quadrant provides us to deliver a solution that's based upon that real observation and all of the observations that we have in our system. So our first example, we had a customer that's actually in the banking industry in the United States. And in the United States, they passed a law called the Community Reinvestment Act. And what that law did was encourage banks to go out and advertise their services and engage with low and moderate income customers because they viewed that those customers had been underserved by the banking industry. So part of that law is that there are a number of requirements for the banks to provide reporting back to the federal agencies relative to their outreach to these consumers that are underserved. But there are also severe penalties if they don't meet the specific targets set forth in the Reinvestment Act. And those can amount to hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in penalties if they do not provide the appropriate outreach. So our client in the banking industry was asking us, what can we do as a location-based analytics company to basically help them both do outreach to these customers, but also provide the level of reporting that was required back to the federal agencies. Based upon that, OnSpot worked with them on a number of different things to implement a program that not only stretched from that outreach, but also all the way through the reporting aspects of it as well. And we've been doing this for over a year with this client now, and they've been quite pleased with the results that they've been able to achieve, not only in meeting the letter of the law and reporting requirements they have, but also helping them drive additional business to their banks. Let's move on to the next slide and we can talk a little more about how this was done. The law is basically targeted around what are called census blocks. And these are a subdivision in the United States that break out certain geographic areas. And the government goes in and defines certain census blocks as low to moderate income. And what the bank has to show is that they are advertising to consumers that live within these low to moderate income census blocks. So these are examples of a few different locations in the United States that have been defined by the government as as one of these census blocks that they have to target in their marketing and outreach. Let's move to the next slide and we can talk some more about this. In terms of what they have to report back to the government, they actually have to map back to a household address within that census block and show what they've done from an outreach perspective. So what OnSpot implemented for them initially was to, first of all, identify the households that are within that census block and map that back to the mobile ad IDs that we have associated with those households. Once we did that, we were able to go out and launch advertising campaigns on behalf of the bank to these consumers specifically. So the targeting data was set to specific mobile ad IDs. And whenever we see those mobile ad IDs, we're able to go out and do an advertising impression to that individual device. And that helps satisfy their goals of outreach to these individuals. And as you can see, at the end of the campaign, at each month, what we do is we report back to them for those addresses that are within that serving area in those census blocks that they have to be targeting. How many impressions did we deliver to that household? Did they click on it? Did they come into the bank? So we've also done additional types of metrics around not only did they perform the outreach, but what was the response from the consumer side to show that they're doing more than just advertising to them, but they're also serving them with banking services as well. We can move on to the next slide and we can talk about that. The way that we're doing that proof of how they're engaging on the banking services side is we're doing footfall attribution within each of the banks that the bank has in their system. So, for example, in this one, we're looking at a report for one of the banks where there were 480 unique respondents that actually came into one of their banks from one of these census blocks. And that also shows you back a number of information as to when they visited. Did they come back more than once? What was the outreach in terms of what zip code did they come from? What city did they come from? All of this information is not only useful for them from a reporting purpose, but it also matches back to their marketing spend. So their department knows that they've spent their marketing dollars not only to satisfy the law, but they're also getting a return from their their business side of that marketing spend as well. So for them, it's a win-win for them to have this kind of program because they're satisfying multiple needs by being able to use this location data to really match out and do their outreach to these consumers. So that's been a critical part of this partnership for this customer, and that's why they've been doing this for over a year now. And at this point, we don't see them stopping doing it anytime soon because it's such a critical part of their program. And it's also very cost effective for them because they're doing this through mobile digital advertising. So the cost of outreach is not very high for them to do this. But the nice thing is because they also know who they're outreaching to and who's responding, they can also do additional outreach if they so choose. They can also link this back to household addresses, do things like direct mail in as an overlay to their digital campaigns. They can do a number of different things to improve the outreach with video ads. They can do standard banner ads. The whole arena of digital marketing is available to them, but it can also be overlaid with real world marketing as well. So for them, it gives them a number of tools that they can start to leverage, not only for their existing customers, but for these other customers that they're outreaching to now.
We had a question that came in about this specific use case, Dale. What advantages did this particular banking customer have in using OnSpot's data versus similar location data competitors in the same space? And maybe just some more notes on what's unique about the OnSpot data and reporting.
So one of the things that OnSpot's always been a leader on is basically taking those mobile ad IDs and associating them back to a physical household address. That gives us that ability then to create these targeted audiences within these census blocks or using other criteria that a customer may give us. So that gives us a very powerful way to do outreach when somebody is trying to hit a specific set of consumers, whether that's a trade area around a business or a specific set of zip codes or census blocks or other things. Tying that back to our reporting, again, gives you that ability then to link your responses for the campaigns that were run on our DSP. We can actually see which of those households got served that ad. And that's something that most DSPs can't tell you today. They won't even identify which mobile ad IDs from your target audience received an advertisement. Whereas with our solution, from the audience targeting through the delivery of the campaign on our DSP, we're able to actually go out and say, this household was shown advertisements. We can tell you how many advertisements. We can get down to when and what date they were shown an advertisement if you want to get that granular about it. But then also link that back to the responses that we see both on the click-throughs on the website, as well as their footfall attribution when they come into a bank to conduct business with them. So that gives you a very holistic view from the targeting all the way through the delivery that really isn't available when you run campaigns for most digital media today. I do see another question regarding what countries this information is available in. Right now, we do this in the US only. We produce and process such large volumes of information that we've focused on the US market. We have had discussions with other customers around Canada, Mexico, and other markets outside the US. And there is potential for us to expand to those markets if the opportunity is meaningful. I see we have a number of other questions coming in. I'm going to jump through a couple of examples and we'll dive back to some of these more general questions as we go through that. Why don't we move to the next slide and we can talk about the next case. I want to make sure we get through at least the cases and then we can answer some of the more of these questions. One of the other interesting cases that got presented to us was a company that runs these large trucks that have advertisement on the side of them, and they They will drive around in cities or around at events with basically what is a mobile billboard, if you will, and they're digital billboards on the back of these trucks. The problem they have as the business is, one, the first question they always get asked by their advertisers is, well, who's seeing my advertisement? And then the next question is, well, what should I be paying? Because how many people are actually seeing this? And you know, what's the real reach that I'm getting out of this? So as a business, they're really trying to solve a number of different problems. And it's linked back to where are these trucks going and who's being exposed to them. If we move to the next slide, we can talk about how we did some of this for them. You can see on the right, there's an example of one of the routes that one of these trucks drove in Dallas, Texas. It can just drive around the route, but basically all the customer is able to give us is a set of location data from the vehicle itself that said at this time the vehicle was at this location. From that data, we basically mapped out the route of the truck using our underlying location data that we have available of all the devices that were around those locations. We were then able to look at a 50-meter radius around the truck, and part of it was figuring out how far do we need to look, because these signs are very large. And after some research, we went and found out that, you know, with billboards and out-of-home advertising, there are guidelines as to what's the distance that an advertisement is visible based upon the text size or the image size that's used in that advertisement. Based on that, we worked with the client and they said, yes, that 50-meter radius makes perfect sense to them. The next question became, well, what happens when there's a building that falls in that 50-meter radius? What are we going to do there? So we had that discussion with the client as well. And they said, well, you know, most of those first floor businesses that are going to be exposed to that are retail locations, and there's customers in there that can actually see out the window. So, you know, you don't want to necessarily limit it just because there's a building there. They could have gone the other route and said, no, we just want to capture the sidewalks that are in front of those buildings. And with OnSpot's system, we're granular enough and have high enough quality data that we can make that differentiation. If you wanted just a sidewalk, we'd give you just a sidewalk. But they said, no, give us the sidewalk and however much overlap that goes into the building. And we use that data then to build out the audience that was exposed to their advertisements based upon the truck route that was available. Once we had that audience, it's available to them to actually go out and use as a digital targeting audience. So if they wanted to run additional advertisements to those people, they could do that. So you could actually do retargeting from a billboard that was displayed on a truck. But it also served that other purpose of saying, well, this truck exposed that advertisement to this number of people during that time frame. That was what the retailer and the advertiser needed to understand how their ad spend was being utilized. Did they get their money's worth in terms of that return on the ad spend that they got? The nice thing about the fact that it was using our system for this data is once we have those exposed devices, we can also match that back to the households. So you can start to see not only how many, but what were the demographics of the people that were exposed to that advertising? Where do they live? What zip codes do they reside in? What towns do they reside in? So that was a very powerful way for them to also provide additional value to their advertiser so that their advertiser could understand exactly how many people and what that audience looked like that their ads were exposed to. So if they're trying to reach a 20-something audience that has high income, they're able to figure that out, that truck drove a route that actually got them to the right consumers that they were trying to reach. So there's so much power in having that linkage between the mobile ad ID, the household, and all of the data behind it from a marketing perspective and a demographics perspective that allows our clients to leverage that solution into multiple aspects and facets of their business. I think we can go to the next slide. And again, this is another example where we've got a digital out-of-home vendor. So they've got a number of video displays at gas stations across the United States, both on the pumps as well as inside the convenience stores that are associated with those gas stations. And they sell their advertising inventory through a digital ad exchange called Place Exchange that caters to the out-of-home community. And part of what Place Exchange does is has those vendors provide measurement of their locations, and they use that to help set the advertising rates that they sell their media for. Most of the customers in these exchanges are using GeoPath or something like GeoPath for that measurement today. And our customer came and said, can you do better? Can you give me more precise measurement than GeoPath? Because GeoPath was relying heavily on traffic models and all of these other things to come up with, you know, the exposed audience at these locations. And they just felt that it wasn't an accurate representation of what their ads were being exposed to. So very similar to the last example, instead of having to take a moving example, we were able to basically take all of the gas stations where they have their media stored. We can look at the next slide where there's an example of one of those gas stations. And you can see that we can draw a very precise measurement around it. We could have selected just the building itself. We could have selected just that rectangular area that was where the gas pumps are located. We can get very granular in terms of that, but they said, no, we want to capture everybody that was at that gas station and use that measurement not only for the number of people visiting, but can you give us some idea of what the dwell time is? How long were they there? So that we can figure out how many ads they can be exposed to during the time that a person is usually at the gas station. So using the data that we have underlying in the system, we were able to build out that report for them. And once a month, they upload this report into the Place Exchange system, and that helps set their advertising rates for the next month. So for them, it's a critical business function. Now, they've also looked at and said, well, gee, now that we have all of this data, we can actually start to go back and tell our advertisers who got exposed to their advertisement, so they can start to provide incremental value for that out-of-home media that they're providing beyond just placement of the advertisement and giving that advertiser back a number that, hey, 1,000 people saw your ad. Now we can tell you more about them. And that's where I keep coming back to how critical it is to have that intelligence within a system that links that location data back to all of the marketing data that exists, back to all of that demographic data that exists, back to all of that purchase data. There are so many different sources for data that are basically on the periphery that when you start combining them all together, it gives you a very powerful view of a consumer or a geography or a household that becomes critical to those advertisers or those businesses in terms of how they engage with those consumers. Moving on to the next slide. This is the more traditional advertising. We recently worked with a quick serve restaurant they're actually a chicken chain, and I was surprised when I learned how many different varieties of chicken chains there are in the United States. There's probably 20 or 30 different brands that go out and have quick serve restaurants that specialize in chicken meals. But this particular brand is up and coming. They're opening a lot of new stores all over the country, and they're just trying to capture more business for their stores as they open them. So they're basically trying to implement enough number of different tactics using digital advertising to go out and engage with those consumers. If we go to the next slide, we can see what some of those tactics are that they implemented. They wanted to reach out to consumers that had visited one of their restaurants in the last 90 days. They wanted to build a custom trade area based upon a 5, 10, or so mile radius around a store, because they understand that people don't travel that far to go get a quick meal. They also wanted to look at the competitor restaurants. So who was visiting the competing chicken restaurants during that 90-day period? OnSpot was able to build all of these out using our platform for them. In fact, the consumer can build them out, or the advertiser or the agency could build those out themselves using our platform. It's so easy to use. So basically, with that foundational audience from these 3 different targeting methods, they were able to go out and run a digital campaign in late July and the entire month of August, using both mobile display ads as well as connected TV. So a lot of streaming video advertising. That for them was the best way to do that outreach for the consumer, and they wanted to see what kind of response they were going to get out of that. You can see from the right, one of those example audiences that we built was based upon that trade area audience of who actually had come into their restaurant location. And you can see that it covered quite a wide area. So they get a lot of insight as to where their consumers are coming from as well when they get this kind of reporting from the location data. If we go to the next slide, we can see what kind of results they achieved, which they were fairly happy with, I would say. Basically, as a result of the advertising they ran to these very targeted geo audiences, they saw a 22% increase in their month-over-month click-through rates on the banner ads. They saw 15% better view completion rates on their video advertising that they were doing through connected TV, with a 97% view completion rate, which is a very high rate for video in the industry. They also saw a 280% foot traffic increase, which meant that they were successful in driving the customers into their locations to actually make a purchase. And they saw 132,000, almost 133,000 unique visitors into those stores that they were advertising for. So by a number of metrics, they saw this as a success. If you do the math for what their average bill is and some other things, they probably got about a 15 times return in terms of the spend for their chicken versus the amount that they spent on the advertising campaign. So getting that kind of return made their marketing department happy. It made their financial officer very happy. And that's the power of using a targeted location audience where you have these analytics and these metrics available to you to go out and perform the work ahead of time to find somebody that is a highly targeted customer for that advertisement, and not just doing random advertising to a geography or through television or other methods that are very, very untargeted methods of advertising. Our consumers and advertisers and agencies and advertisers that work with us, the first time they run a campaign often don't believe the results that they achieve with them, because it's so much higher than they typically achieve with a standard campaign out there. But once they start to do things like match back reporting to take their sales reports and match that against the footfall attribution reports that we provide with them, they start to understand that, yes, the metrics they achieved were real and their spend was in line with what they were hoping to achieve, and their results were far superior to what they were hoping to achieve. So location data provides that really solid foundation. The analytics behind it, when you link it to all of these other data sources, give you that ability then to really leverage that into ways in which people don't necessarily understand initially. And frankly, we learn as much from our customers as we do from looking at location data, because they come to us with these interesting questions. And let's go to the next slide. And I think we're probably to the point where we're going to reach our conclusion. As I've told you, using all these various tools, we can build those audiences. We can do free audience analysis to build that targeting. We can use it so that a retailer can understand who their customers are. It's shocking when retailers come and tell you, I know who my customer is. And then you show them the analytics based upon who's actually visited their store, and they go, that's not who we thought it was. But this is based on reality for them, and it gives them additional insights that are more valuable. Turning those analytics into something actionable, whether it's getting better rates for the media that I'm selling, whether it's actually activating a campaign on digital media, on social media, direct mail, any other channel that's available. All of those are critical, because just having data by itself isn't useful to a company. It has to achieve something. It has to benefit them. It has to generate something that's meaningful to their business. So what OnSpot has always strived to achieve is, how do we take something that's just data and turn it into something that's actionable for our customers? And that's really the key to our success. And using data from Quadrant and others, we're able to really take those various sources of data, link them together, and provide that value in a very easy way for that advertiser or that business to use. I think that brings us to questions next. And I see we've got a number of different ones that have popped up here.
Yep. Do you want me to go over them one by one, Dale, so you can answer them?
Yes, please. Let's try
Okay.
to get through as many of these as we can.
Perfect. The first one came up when you were presenting the moving trucks use case. And it's about, in which countries is this information available? I'm assuming they're talking about the OnSpot platform and the ready-to-use analytics.
Yes, we're currently only processing data for the US. We have some Canadian data as well, but based upon the volume of data that we process and the fact that we make it available to our customers within 3 days of an observation being made, we're doing a significant amount of processing that we very much focused on the US at this point.
Okay, there's another question that came around the same time as well. With this type of data linkage, could we visualize on a map where the people who enter our pharmacies live?
Yes, absolutely. If you looked at some of those heat maps that we showed during the presentation, those are based upon not only where people live, but we can also map back to where people work. What we often see for retailers in particular is that they do want to know how far they're drawing their consumers from, but they also oftentimes see a very distinct shift between the day and evening customers, because many times you have commuters that come into work in an area during the day that will go out to a restaurant or go to a business while they're at work. And so having that ability then to show not only what is the home location for those consumers, but also the work location, gives additional insights to that retailer that they can benefit from.
All right, there's another one here that says, do you plan to have an API integration with Hivestack like some other measurement partners do, would allow automatic stats assigned to the digital signs, etc.?
We're working with a number of different partners right now in integrations. We're focusing on some of the integrations. We have APIs basically built out for our entire system. So most of our larger customers have direct integrations into our platform, and they're using that to basically augment their own digital buying desks or other things. What we have worked on in the digital out-of-home space is we're working with individual publishers at this point that want to get better data loaded into the system for their benefit. We are certified as a measurement platform in Place Exchange, but we're also talking with a number of the other digital out-of-home exchanges at this point as well. I hope that answers the question. If not, we can ask a follow-up and try to give you more detail.
Okay, perfect. There's another one here that says, what types of data do you utilize and how many data sources do you use?
At this point, we actually base everything in the platform on location data for the initial analytics, but then we also attach things such as household level demographic data. We use underlying parcel data to help us build out what we call a geoframe to analyze much more quickly. So if I wanted to go look at a particular brand or retailer at a regional or nationwide level, I could very quickly select all of their locations and build that data out without having to manually draw those geoframes around each location for them. So that's a very powerful tool that we have that's based upon all of the parcel data for all of the land in the US. We're also attaching things like purchase data that's provided by third parties, and we're also exploring other sources of data around media and media consumption. So digital music, digital video, and things like that. We've got a partner that we're engaged with right now to start to understand how their data can be used in conjunction with this. We're always expanding what we think might be valuable data that could be associated to a mobile device to benefit the retailers for either targeting or better understanding a consumer's interest.
Great. There's another one here about behavioral and payment data, but I think you kind of answered that in the previous question. Okay, I'm going to take one last one for you and then another one for Tim, and then we can answer the rest of them via email. So the last question for you is, how can this technology be used to measure the cannibalization rate of opening a new point of sales in pharmacies of the same brand?
Basically, you have the ability, one of the things I didn't mention is that OnSpot actually has a year's worth of data in its active platform. So you can do up to a year look back using our platform. That allows you to actually start baselining and building things like those serving audiences and regional audiences out and understand where your consumers have been coming from. You can then also see when you open that new location, which consumers from the original location now are showing up at the new location as well. So you could actually do comparison reports to basically see who's being cannibalized from one location to another. It's very similar to what we do with some of the reporting that we do for advertisers that are trying to see when they advertise to a competitor's consumers. Did I actually draw that consumer from the competitor to my store instead? So all of that data is available, and the system can build out the reporting to give you insights on who did I successfully take from one location to another, and that would be the same as a cannibalization report for you. So we can definitely provide that kind of information.
Awesome, great. We do have a case study about cannibalization for home improvements stores on our website as well. So if you guys are interested, you can go and check that out there. And the last question, it's actually a mix of questions. I see a lot of data availability questions here, and most of them are about data availability in Latin America. So maybe Tim can talk a little bit about our data coverage for Latin America, as we do serve a lot of clients there.
Sure. We have a global panel with the exception of Western Europe. We made the business decision a while back to remove data from those countries, basically those under GDPR compliance. At that time, there just wasn't the business relevance use case there, but Latin America, South America, very strong geographies for us. The data is collected the same way, regardless. We work with tens of thousands of applications and developers around the world to gather that compliant user opt-in data right from within the application. So it's all GPS-based data that we're providing. and a lot more nuances to that in terms of how it can be delivered to organizations, formatting, frequency, et cetera. So happy to coordinate and meet with anybody to talk the details around that.
All right, thank you, Tim. I do see one interesting question here that I don't want to miss out on. So last question for you, Dale, before we close out the session. How do you sort out employees and other non-useful observations from the analysis?
You can actually look at the frequency that somebody is viewed at a location, and typically an employee is going to be seen far more frequently than an individual consumer. In reality, with most of our customers, we tell them not to bother because there's a couple of reasons for that. One is in terms of the overall audience size, the number of employees is typically very, very small to being insignificant. But the other thing is, in many cases, you want people to see your advertisement, even if they're your employees, so they know that you're advertising and they see what you're advertising to the consumers that are coming into the store. So in many cases, and I would say in most cases, honestly, our advertisers don't bother taking out the individual workers. We do have cases where people are trying to look for employees, where they specifically want to find the workers at a location, and they will then advertise job postings to them directly. So that's a different use case where you would actually want to identify the employees within a company. So we have the ability. It's easy to do. In some cases, it makes sense. In others, it's something that's just not even worth spending the time on.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Dale. And thank you everyone for joining our session for today. If you have any further questions, our email addresses are now on the screen. You can always send us an email. I will be sending out a recording of the session right after this webinar ends. And we will also be sending an FAQ follow-up in a couple of days where we will answer all the questions that were asked in this session. So if your question was missed out, please don't worry, it'll be answered on the email. It'll be in your inboxes in a couple of days here. Thanks again for Dale and Alyssa for joining us today and giving us your time. And we will see you on our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dale. Have a great day, everybody.